everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest today is Dr. Connor Yost. He's Chief Medical Officer at Skriber. Welcome, Connor.
Hey, John, so happy to be here. Really excited to dive into, what we've been doing at Skriber and why it's been so remarkable for physicians.
Yeah, well, obviously at Healthcare IT Today, we're huge fans of this whole AI medical scribe, AI assistant space, ambient clinical voice, whatever you call it these days. It's evolving so quickly, but excited to learn more about your product. But let's start. Tell us about yourself and Skriber.
Yeah, so, my story really begins with the fact that, for the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of research within large language models, AI, and how they kind of can impact medicine. I've won grants with the American Medical Association for my work with innovation within AI, and published papers on this. And a couple years ago, I met Hayden and Matthew Priest, Hayden Plummer, and at the time I was using an AI scribe myself, but it wasn't great. And in the early adoption, everyone was so excited about products like this that it didn't matter if the product didn't work that well. It just mattered that it was cool. And so as I was talking with them and connected with them, the idea basically began that, hey, I understand this technology. It doesn't feel like a physician is involved in creating it because everyone seems to think it's great until it gets to a physician, and then we have to edit everything. And a lot of the physicians I knew that were using scribes really weren't saving a lot of time because even though it was cool that they got to use it, only about 30% of the conversation a physician has with a patient is what's documented in the notes. The other 70% is all up here. It's what we're seeing, it's what we're thinking, it's what we're processing. And so we came together with the idea of trying to use someone who understood the technology, that understood also medicine, and try to create a product that means saving more time for physicians.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, tell me more about that story. And what's the background of your other, co-founders? What do they bring to the table? Obviously, you bring the medical expertise, and you've been doing the AI stuff. Talk about that and how it all came together into the product and where you're focusing.
Yeah, so Hayden Plummer was, a marketing expert, and Matthew Priest was a previous CTO at another company called SolGen, which was basically a technology company for renewable energy sources. And they had exited out of the company successfully a few years ago. And to be honest, I think they were just bored and they wanted to start a new project. And so, as they had this idea of trying to create a tool that would save more time for physicians, because that's what they were seeing so much, is physicians running in and out of appointments, family members that were in the medical space that were spending so much of their time documenting after late nights. I said, why don't we just build this? And they reached around and asked for some referrals, and some people that they knew me, and we got put together. And to be honest, it was a really good fit. And so, what I loved, and I think is very unique about both of them, was that people that are highly successful within the technology field tend to feel very much that they know everything
Hmm.
and that they can do everything without anyone else's help. And everything that I told them, all the points that I brought, all the concerns I had, they listened and they said, we want to make something that has feedback from someone who understands medicine. We don't want to tell you what you should be doing. We want you to tell us what it needs to look like. And I love that receptibility that they had and desire to include experts in their products.
Yeah, it is interesting in the startup space, the arrogance of success and how, for me, the repeat entrepreneurs are those who are humble, right? And willing to learn and willing to listen. It's amazing to see. So how does your solution compare to the other AI medical scribes, ambient clinical voice solutions on the market?
Yeah, so let's kind of start off with, what I initially saw as we were developing the product, right? We had a team of engineers that were building everything, and they copied, not copied, but they tried to mimic another product. And they came to me and they said, "Check it out. How great does this look?" And I said, "This is horrible." I said, "What do you mean? You don't have these in the right sections. This isn't how we speak as physicians." And so, we spent time and days through this. And the fact is that, you know, people that are in the technology space don't understand medicine. And people that are in medicine don't understand, artificial intelligence and technology. And so I was happy to be able to bridge these two together and to be able to say, what if we do this or integrate with this? How if we redesign some of these things? And one of the biggest things that we talked about initially was the prompts, right? The baseline for the templates and what they said. And one of the aspects of Scriber that has continued from this idea that a physician needs to build the prompts. I
Mm,
need to be able to have a say of what it's saying, of how it's saying, what type of words it should be using, what type of databases does it pull information from, how should we prioritize what the note looks like, and then how do we optimize the billing. And so we went back and forth and we worked super hard to create a product that really had what physicians need to be able to bill properly to an insurance company. And then we took that a step farther and we made it so that every physician that comes and uses our product speaks with one of our engineers to create their own prompt. Because not only, is how I write in internal medicine different than an OBGYN or a psychiatry, but they need their voices heard as well.
mm.
And that's where Scriber, I think, differs, is that we hear the physician's voice. We spend time every time they set up with our product to hear their needs, to mimic and replicate their style of writing. Because at the end of the day, it's not Scriber signing these notes, it's the physicians.
Yeah.
So that input is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've certainly heard this when I hear about adoption and who's adopting it. I've heard many informaticists say the ones that are adopting are those that aren't, you know, crazy about how their note looks and about their style. So it's interesting that you embraced that idea of like every doctor wants their own style of note, almost I would describe it, or at least as you said it, their voice to be, heard in the note.
It is their voice. That's the thing, is that every note is their operation, is their documentation. Right. Now, I won't speak on physicians that are less lax about these things, but I'm proud of my notes. I'm proud of them because they reflect how hard I worked
Yeah.
for that patient. And every specialty is different. There's not one template that can just be used across all specialties. We're not trained the same. We're not, we don't we don't spend 3 to 7 years in residency to all document exactly the same.
Mm,
Now, the other aspect of this that is very under talked about in medicine is also the billing aspect, right?
mm.
And you're going to hear this from a lot of physicians. They get very upset that their notes and the way that they're doing them isn't sufficient to bill. And I hear it every day. Oh my goodness, I'm getting another complaint about my note. Oh man, I have to go back and spend another hour and a half later today to redocument a note of a patient I saw a week and a half ago because their MRI was declined.
Yeah. And the
And
CDI expert hates sending that message to the doctor too.
well, I mean, they're grateful to have a job, right?
Sure.
First off, they just hate having to talk with the doctors about it because we are not pleasant when it comes to CDI inquiries because we're frustrated.
Sure.
Why is the way I'm speaking not sufficient? So what we did within the prompt is that we tried to teach our model to focus on billing codes that are more viable and more usable for their plans. Because sometimes it's not about that the physician did something wrong. It's just that they picked the wrong problem. For example, sepsis is a common thing talked about in the hospital. There's a specific code for sepsis. Sepsis is everything for most internal medicine doctors because if you miss sepsis, it's not good. But at the same time, rationalizing sepsis is commonly misunderstood. And so you can say that the patient is hypoxic and you can document that they have a lactic acid that's elevated and you can say that they have a pneumonia. All of those things rationalize for sepsis. But if you didn't bill for sepsis, you missed out on a massive billing code. And this is where, from a physician's perspective, I did everything. I put everything in there, but you didn't put the right code. And
Yeah.
that's where we've really tried to focus on is taking what they're saying and what they're doing in their plan and putting together the correct ICD-10 codes with the rationale that's going to meet the requirements for these insurance companies.
Yeah. So interesting. So walk us through, like, what does the workflow look like for a clinician? Are you using mobile devices? Are you using desktop browser? And talk about kind of the onboarding process for a clinician. How do you onboard them? Are you training them? Talk about both the workflow and onboarding.
Yeah. So the onboarding process is very simple. When people sign up, they're going to get a call from one of our engineers, and they're going to go through and they're going to help them set up how to do this. Now, if you're a physician, anywhere you've gone, you had an EMR team that trained you how to use your EMR. So just downloading an app and being expected to use it immediately, no matter how smart we are, we don't have the time to figure out how to use it. And a lot of the errors that people have with their own scribes are because they're just using a lot of them wrong. So we initially start off with the fact that we have someone walk them through how to use it, what to do, and how to make sure that it's useful. That's more important than just using it. So the workflow is that you can have an app, you could have a web browser, you could put it on a computer, very much a preference thing, right? I don't want to tell someone how to do it, but I want to tell them how to make the most of it. And so then we go through and we explain to them that the app is going to work better if you give it information before you see the patient. So the first clinical step is you start your note on Skriber and you tell it about your patient. This is a 52-year-old female with a past medical history of diabetes, heart failure with an ejection fraction of less than 35%, insulin controlled for her diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis for the last 10 years, who is presenting today with needs for refill of her medications. She also wants a referral to rheumatology. And that's it. And you give
Interesting.
it
So
some
you're priming the
information up.
note.
You prime the note. And the reason why is because now that you've said this, right? And it's very similar to in residency when we're telling someone else about our patient or we're talking to a colleague over the phone. We call it a sign out, right? Or a sign off or a consult. You're simply consulting the note and telling it a little bit about your patient before you go to see them. And by doing so, the quality of the note astronomically higher. We have seen this constantly where people call in and they're unhappy with the product, and all we do is just tweak that one small bit, and they're like, "Wow!" Because these models, we forget sometimes that these models are designed to be only as good as the input we give them. And if you remember, we talked about how physicians, 70% of what is in the note is what's up here. So by giving it more information of what's going through our head, I don't need to go into that room and tell the patient, hi, you have a heart failure of 35% ejection fraction and type 2 diabetes. It's uncontrolled. You're on insulin. All of those things are uncomfortable things to say in front of a patient, but need to be said for the quality of the note. So that's the first step, is give it some background information. The second is when you go in there, whatever device you're using, You're going to record the conversation and talk to them normally. Now, if there's any sort of changes or anything else you wanted to say to it, I always tell people if you leave the room, you can say a few more things to it that you didn't want to say in front of the patient. But most of the time, there's not much I wouldn't say to a patient, especially if I gave it a couple liners before I went in. End the conversation takes about 2 or 3 minutes to be able to build. And then you're just going to copy that and place it onto your note. Or if it's integrated into your EMR, it will do it automatically. So that's kind of the clinical workload that we see.
Talk to me about the how you're leveraging technology. I think you're fully automated with technology on the back end. I think the human back end is gone now these days. But how are you balancing kind of technology with humans in the background, or even the human clinician that's checking the note?
So obviously there's going to be errors whenever we use this type of technology, right? When it comes to balancing kind of the feedback of having, you know, people in the background or, people saying things that are the most random things that aren't part of the note. The device in the program is designed to ignore things that are not medically relevant. But that also is dependent on the specialty. So you have to be careful about this because them talking about their friend that they hung out with 2 weeks ago is not necessarily relevant for an internal medicine physician, but it might be very relevant for a psychiatric patient who's been in the wards for 2 weeks and hasn't seen anyone, right?
Yeah.
So it's very dependent on the specialty, but we try to teach it to ignore things that are not pertinent for those specific specialties. Does that kind of answer your question, or is there more kind of within
Yeah, no,
that?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, I'd love to also hear more about the EHR integration. You mentioned that as well. How is it integrated with the EHR? Are you working with all EHRs, certain ones right now? Or, how are you approaching EHR integration?
Yeah, so EHR integration right now, we're fully able to integrate with things like Epic, Athena, eClinicalWorks, and then we're in beta testing for a bunch of other ones. I wish that we could just say that we are integrated with every EMR. That's definitely a goal of ours. But a lot of it has come to the time of trying to integrate and make it a tool that'll work, right? Now,
Mhm.
at the moment, most of the integration is populating the notes in the right place and placing them in the right place. Um, One of the hardest parts is pulling information from previous notes, and it just depends on the access that we have within the hospital system and how many users that we have, and if we're able to to do that for those clients. And so it just depends. A lot of our clients do a lot of clinical works, and so they don't necessarily need as much integration as maybe a hospital system would.
Interesting. And talk to me about the clinician perspective. I love that you are a clinician. So, like, how do they have to change the way they're talking in the exam room to make this work? I find it interesting you have them doing kind of the pre-note. That's one thing I guess they would have to change in their process using
Yeah.
Scriber. But what else do you tell people as far as what else should they change? The obvious ones we've heard on this series is they can't read your brain yet. Anyway, one day maybe Neuralink will work or whatever. But they can't read your brain. It can't see that you're touching this leg. You need to see you're touching the right leg or whatever. But anyway, what other things have you seen in how clinicians have to kind of adapt to make this really
Yeah.
effective for them?
Well, kind of coming back to it, there's a lot of people that aren't taught how to use it when they go in, which is why they have bad experiences, right? That's the whole reason why we have someone on the phone to teach you and walk you through how to use this, because you're going to have to change the way that you interact with patients. Now, some people out there, some companies might recommend saying everything within the patient room. And I just don't think that that's necessary. And as you said, the AI can't read your brain, right? But it can understand different words if you give it some background before it goes in there.
Hmm.
I can say heart failure with a 35% ejection fraction and go in there and talk about their heart. And it now knows what I'm talking about. Looks like we're going to change some of the medications for your heart, right? Now it knows where to put those things and it knows why we're changing them and what medications. So giving it background is the first thing. And I can't emphasize enough of just how we hammer that with our physicians because of the quality increase. The second thing is that you can talk about your physical exam. It doesn't need to be that you say, oh, I noticed that the lungs sound clear to auscultations bilateral, no rales, wheezes, or rhonchi. That's awkward. No physician should say that, right?
Uh-huh.
And so what we did with our physical exam is we actually created templates of the physical exam that's a negative based on the type of physician you are. And that allows you to tell the person your pertinent findings.
Mm.
Yeah, I actually just listened to your lungs and they do sound kind of wheezy on the right side. Done. That's all you need to say. It's going to document saying right lower lobe or right middle lobe wheezes
Mm.
in a medical terminology that fits how you would document. You don't have to say those exact words to the patient because it's awkward. We're not trying to make these conversations more awkward. We're trying to make it so that you can be more forward with your patients.
Yeah.
And you know what? What's so cool about this is they love it. The patients love it because you're giving them more information about what you're finding and not just keeping it all cerebral and then documenting it later.
Yeah. Yeah, we've heard that a lot, right? The patients love the transparency, and I think all of us have experienced that. Like, what is the doctor thinking right now? And so it's great that it's being vocalized more. But it is interesting bridging the gap of health literacy, for lack of a better term, as far as what you say clinically, and you need to say clinically for the billing, for the record, for liability, et cetera, versus what does the patient actually understand. Your example is really a great one of that. I'd love to hear about how you approach accuracy, right? Accuracy of the solution is so interesting. It's obviously a hot topic with any large language model, AI, machine learning, et cetera. But how are you kind of evaluating the accuracy of your solution and looking at accuracy?
Great question. So let's start off with kind of what a large language model is, right? A large language model, in its sense, is a program that is the sound like another person.
Mhm.
That's the whole basis behind it. There is nothing within that sentence that says accuracy is the primary goal of a large language model. That's why if you ask ChatGPT and say, I want you to tell me that the sky is red and give me an argument, it sounds legit. It sounds accurate, right? So input is key. That's the first thing I'll say. That's why, again, coming back to it, giving it some background before you go in there keeps it within the boundaries of what it's supposed to. What physicians get really frustrated at is they go in there and they talk about a bunch of things with the patient, and then the note creates something that's not true because it's trying to fill in the blanks that you didn't give it to make it sound right. Now, we at Skriber understand that this is also going to cause more work for physicians to have to correct all of this. So we have barriers in place within our programming to avoid giving information if it doesn't know. And sometimes just to say, need clarification on this. Now, let's come back to accuracy, right?
Mhm.
If you're a physician and you've been alive in the last 20 years, you've used Dragon, right? That's the dictating service. Do,
Yep.
do you by chance know what the error rate for Dragon is? Has anyone talked about this with you?
Well, I mean, I've been through since the early days when it was in the 60-70% range. And then they got to the 90s. That was the latest I've
Yeah.
seen, somewhere in the 90s.
So you're right. In the early 2000s, it was notorious for Dragon to just not work, right? And then in the
And you had to
2010s,
train it for like a month.
you had to you had to sit there and
They got
read
rid of
every
that at
little
least.
word and had to learn. Oh, that was horrible, right? That was horrible. So that was kind of the initial aspect of Dragon, right? The current error rate for Dragon right now is somewhere around 3 to 5%, right? 3 to 5% of the time, it's going to get a word wrong. It's going to say
Yep.
something incorrect. And I see that all the time in my own dictation. Um, Scribers is a little bit above that. I'm not going to lie. I wish we could get down to a 3 to 5%. I'd say it's probably around a 6, maybe 6.5 to 7% error rate, right? And part of that is, you have a mic versus a phone or a computer. right? You're going to have a harder time hearing everything that's talked about. So I believe that as these devices and these technology continue to improve, that you're going to see that error rate start to come down to about where Dragon is. And that's kind of the goal. So we put barriers in place to try to decrease that. And we try to teach our physicians how to use it to prevent more errors. One of the biggest issues that people have with AI scribes is they do them, they go in there, they don't know what they're doing, and then the amount of time to fix that note is almost equivalent to the amount of time it takes to fix a med student's note. So, so we don't
Yeah,
want that.
for sure. Well, and people want the note to be accurate, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that continues to evolve, especially as accuracy increases, right, as they review the notes. So, yeah, it'll be fun to watch. Does Scriber work with every specialty, or are you focused on certain specialties? It sounds like you're focused on the ambulatory, which is common, obviously, but does it work with every specialty that out there, or are there certain ones that are better?
So we talked about how, the note quality and the templates are so important, right? Every physician is different. To us, there are very few situations where we wouldn't recommend using Skriber,
Mhm.
right? When some physicians have documentation that they're still, writing out where they're circling parts on the body and things like that, that's more difficult, right? That's not really possible to do something like that. Um, as far as just in typical medical specialties, there really isn't one that we can't do because we're basing it off of the way that they write their notes and what they're doing. And so if we have one and what the pathway is currently at the company is that someone comes in and the engineer can't figure out how to work their template, it goes up the ranks until usually it comes to me. And then I go back and I redo it to make it feel like a physician note. And so, there isn't a limitation of what type of specialties we can do.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny you said about the drawing stuff. But I first implemented in EHR. One of the nurses came up to me and she's like, "John, you know why I want to know why I hate the EHR?" I was like, "Why?" "Yeah, I definitely want to hear." And she was doing fine with it, by the way. She used it without a problem. She didn't have any issues. She was a great user. And she's like, "John, I want to do this." And she pulls out the piece of paper. She draws the symbol of man and symbol of female. And she says, "I want to be able to do that." I was like, "Well, guess what? I can't. I can give you the M or F on your drop down." Like, I don't know why she was so obsessed with it, but she was. It
That's
was
so
so
funny.
interesting, right? The little nuances that bug people are fascinating.
They
Well,
are.
yeah. So, I think whenever anyone watches this, their next question is, where can they learn more? Where can they get a demo? Where can they could see it in action? So, where can they find more about Scriber?
Yeah, so you can go to Skriber.com. It's Skriber with a K. And so Skriber.com. And we actually do 30-day free trials. We'll set up your templates for you. Um, to be honest, most people that try it out, they don't realize what they were missing beforehand. And we have tons of people that come to us and have tried multiple different scribe companies only to find out that the reason why it wasn't working is because they either didn't know what they were doing or they needed a template that was designed for them. And so people can come there and they can find out more and they can talk with some of our engineers and they can see why people are coming to Skriber every single day.
That's awesome. Connor, I appreciate you taking time to talk with us and share about the story of Scriber and the work you're doing. It really is the most exciting thing that's happened in health IT since $36 billion of stimulus money. Although this is actually making a much bigger impact for good, I think, than the stimulus. So thanks so much for talking with me and sharing your experience. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcast applications. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks again, John.